Hello, guys, and welcome to Why I Love It, the one series where I talk about movies, films, and shows that I grew up watching, and I'm going to explain to you why I enjoy them. So that's kind of the whole point. And today we are going to be talking about a well-loved show from my childhood that honestly, I'm actually surprised not many people may not know about this show. And this is attempt number 2 to try to record this. And that show is SWAT Cats, The Radical Squadron. Now, this show was produced by Hanna-Barbera for Cartoon Network back in 1993. And oddly enough, today is the day that it actually first aired back in 1993. And of course, we also know today is the day of, well, that one moment in 2001 that we all will never forget, and we all know where we were when it happened. So, small moment of respect for all those lost that day. And with that being said, this show was produced again by Hanna-Barbera Productions, and it was created by Christian and Yvonne Tremblay. And it follows two anthropomorphic cats, and of course, cats with a K, you see there in the title, named Jake Clausen and Chance Furlong, aka T-Bone and Razor, the T-Bone and Razor, respectively. It's also T-Bone is of course Chance, and Razor is Jake Clausen. And the thing is, they were two washed up pilots, or basically they did their jobs better than anybody else in this paramilitary organization known as the Enforcers. They also serve as the civic police for their fictional city of Mega Cat City, which basically is an analog for New York City. Heck, even you see the Twin Towers in some of the backgrounds in a way. But of course, they obviously were discharged for basically their boss interfering with them, and they were discharged from the Enforcers. But because of that, they simply were so content with wanting to be salvagers, so they decided to build their own jet and become vigilantes. And they would start going around and taking on all manners of monsters and villains and saving the city of Megacat from all those monsters and villains that threatened it and all of cat kind. And again, this show really had a lot to go on here. Oh, okay, Kathy, that's true there. And again, like I said though, this is the same exact day that SWAT Cats first aired as well. So it's kind of two things that are one and the same. But yeah, the SWAT Cats become the vigilante fighter pilots. T-Bone is the big yellow cat you see here is the main pilot of their jet, the Turbo Cat, and it's supposed to resemble an F-14 Tomcat interceptor like you see in Top Gun. And Jake Clausen, aka Razor, the slim orange cat here, he's obviously the radar interceptor and also the weapons tactical weapon strategist for the jet. And it's kind of so basically, of course, in a way, T-Bone is Maverick and Razor is Goose in a way, if you're gonna go by Top Gun logic. And of course, since they're going around saving Mega Cat City from all manner of villains and monsters, this show is not complete without its own roster of villains. And one of them you have is a villain known as Dark Cat, and I see if I can pull up any images on the villain himself. In fact, I think there's also a tier list. Also it's been so helpful in a way of getting some things done. So you actually have a few characters here. Let me just stop sharing this and pull up this tier list of characters. Yeah, so as you see here, you have all manner of like random assortment of villains and some random characters. So this this villain here you see, one that I have highlighted, is Mad Cat, and I know it's not the best image of him, but since he is pretty much the main villain, he's basically the one that has the most strategy and the most menace. In fact, he's the very reason the SWAT cats became vigilantes in the first place, even though they're basically disgraced pilots. So he obviously would be the arch villain. Next in line here is the Past Master, and he is obviously another character. He's supposed to be a evil immortal sorcerer from the medieval Dark Ages. He was imprisoned for 800 years in a sarcophagus, and he was released by two foolish grave robbers. In the very first episode of the show, the Past Master rings twice. So again, he's like basically like 3 feet tall, so he's a midget essentially, but he is very powerful. And obviously, with his namesake, he can summon dead and mythical creatures with his mystical pocket watch, and even summon time portals. So truly a pretty bad dude. And another villain we have, I can see him find him in this list of characters. Where is he? Ah, here we go. Dr. Viper was once a greedy scientist named Dr. Evolve Purvis, and he basically was mutated into a half cat, half snake-like creature and assumed the role Dr. Viper. He worked at the Mega Cat Biochemical Labs alongside his more idealistic colleague, Dr. Enzyme, and of course, play on words on Zyme here. And again, you don't really see that much of that. You don't really see that much of that character. He's sort of absent-minded, but he's idealistic and wanting to create research to benefit catkind. But ultimately, I think in the second episode is technically his first and last appearance ever. We don't ever see him again until like the season 2 episode, The Origin of Dr. Viper, where he has a role in that. So this is mostly about his character, and we have two other characters who round out the main list of villains: Mac and Molly Mange, otherwise known as the Metallicats. Now they were former mobsters who were essentially put in prison, but they escaped, and basically during their escape, they actually ended up crashing with a large tugboat while using a rowboat. And they obviously washed up on shore, but they were gravely injured, and they had their brains put into the minds of a former weapons researcher named Dr. Heckle or Professor Heckle. But he renounced his ways and wanted to create robots to serve catkind. But because the Metallicats were violent mobsters, their personalities were not really going to be up to snuff and showing what robots can be helpful. So obviously they turn on the good professor and use a lot of weapons that he had lying around to start seeking revenge against, of course, Mayor Manx, which again, he's a not so good character. He's just a pompous character who obviously is more concerned about wanting to play golf than actually run the city of Megacat. So there you go with that. He's not a very good character. In fact, he's pretty much a coward compared to his great grandfather, the Blue Manx, who was a Mega War II pilot, which is obviously a play on World War II. And he's also made enemies of the Metallicats simply because they think they turned over he turned over their paroles when they were still organic mobsters. But of course, it was actually Callie Briggs, who's probably one of the best characters in the show, who actually is doing all the real work in the city and keeping it running while he's just the staunch figurehead. And of course, the Metallicats obviously move out to betray their former partner, who basically took over their job at the mob. If I can find him, the character's name is Cat Scratch. If I can find him in all of this, where is Cat Scratch? Darn, so it's hard to find some of the images in here because everything is like all really, really cluttered in together. Trying to find him. No. These guys we don't really know that much about him. These are just one of the grave robbers from the very first episode. Where is Cat Scratch? Darn it. I completely lost track of where he is. The heck with it. I don't even know. I just had him some. Oh, here he is. Yeah, this guy here is Cat Scratch, their former mob boss. But of course, when they immediately get their new robotic bodies, they turn on Heckle and they immediately go to find him and basically kill him. And that's one thing you need to know about this show, is that it is not shy of telling you that people actually do die in this show. And again, this is also the reason why the show was kind of canceled, because during all that time, this was one of many shows that was like calling into question for the excessive level of violence. Heck, even Ted Turner himself, who is like the owner of Turner Broadcasting and owns Cartoon Network as well as CNN and various other channels like TBS, TNT. So he obviously went before Congress and basically testified along with other representatives about this whole thing. The same thing with like all the video game violence that was going on as well. And of course, Power Rangers was considered too violent for kids at the time as well. And that was pretty much the main reason why the show was canceled. But it lasted at least a good 2 seasons and had at least 26 episodes. Or 25 episodes, I think. I don't really know. It's either or. But there actually were a lot more episodes that were planned before the show was canceled. And of course, I think, let me go back to the tier list. One of them involved this one-off character named Turmoil, who obviously is a she-cat villain who obviously is trying to control Mega Cat City's airspace. And essentially, the only way people are allowed to pass into the city, or aircraft are allowed in the city, as long as the city pays her $2 million in gold in the episode Cry Turmoil, which again was her only appearance. But again, at the ending of that story, she basically swears revenge against the SWAT cats. But more interesting is that, let me see if I can find him. Where is he? Yeah, T-Bone here, one of the main SWAT cats, obviously is, hold on, obviously tries to, who actually ends up getting captured by Turmoil, and as almost essentially was coerced into her side temporarily, but it was all a ploy so he could apprehend her. But interestingly enough, Turmoil had a lot of experimental aircraft that never got beyond the planning stages. And he was tempted to actually be given command of her Air Force. And of course, she actually has an entire all-female pilot force at the same time. But of course, Razor and T-Bone managed to stop him, aka our two main characters. But also the thing is, we have several other one-off villains like Mad Cat, which is basically a psychotic court jester, but also he is the. Let me see if I can find the person who's actually supposed to be. Yep, this character, yeah, Mad Cat and Lenny Ringtail are both basically merged together. Who are bit. Ringtail is obviously an evil court jester who was imprisoned by the Megalith City royalty in the Dark Ages. So he merges with this crazy former comedian who turned into an asylum patient, and obviously they obviously vow vengeance against Manx, Deputy Mayor Calico Briggs, and of course, let me see if I can find another one of these characters. Yes, Lieutenant Farrell here. Lieutenant Farrell here. And again, they respectively saw them as the king, queen, and knight. And also the court jester who replaced him. Again, since this was the 90s, they basically used a character who was basically a parody of David Letterman, but he was called David Litterbin. So yeah, and again, the show has a lot of cat puns and play on cat themed words because again, they're all supposed to be anthropomorphic cats. And of course, that's pretty much the whole point. That's pretty much like Mad Cat's motivation is just to get revenge on all those people. Another one-off villain is the space cicada, which is basically this cat-like alien cicada thing. And it obviously gets to Earth in a sort of spaceship. Or a spaceship, and immediately it already takes on automatically like bites and basically converts this character, Dr. What was his name? I need to bring up my script here. I actually wrote a script here. Yeah, Dr. Dr. Harley Street into becoming its minion and basically help the cicada propagate its species so it can take over the planet and Megacat City as well. But of course, the giant cicada is thwarted because it eats like radiation and whatnot. And no, this tier list is not the best thing, but I'm trying to show you who some of these characters are at least. And that mainly rounds out like most of these villains. But you also have this character Mutalor, who is obviously this alien pirate lord who's obviously trying to steal the Earth's water, try to steal all Earth's water to be sold to an alien desert world. And that's just basically the gist of his character. And this is like his like second in command or whatever. I forget his name. But yeah, you kind of get the gist of who some of these characters are. You have Lieutenant Steele, who's obviously supposed to be like a greenhorn, but he wants to basically vie for freaking Commander Farrell's job, but he's more content to just sitting behind the desk and having the authority and not the responsibility of leadership. You also have other civilian characters like Angora here, who's obviously a reporter for Cat's Eye News. Let me see. If he is here. No, I don't see him anywhere in the tier list. Maybe I think the person who put this together sort of like. So yeah. Also here, the other character, the Red Lynx, who's obviously trying to kill the Blue Manx during Mega War 2, but basically he returned from the grave to seek revenge against Mayor Manx, aka his great grandson, who's basically a coward. So there you go with that. You also have Dr. Abby Sinian, who's basically an archaeologist for the Mega Cat Museum of History, and also has some knowledge of the supernatural and the occult, and also has been instrumental in dealing with threats pertaining to the past master in a lot of stories involving him, mostly in episodes like the Great Pyramid or the Deadly Pyramid, and of course the past master rings twice. So that's mainly it. And you also have two other characters, the Dark Swat cats from a parallel dimension that the SWAT cats accidentally stumble into during a thunderstorm. And also, of course, you have evil versions of them, as well as an evil version of Callie, who basically allies with Dark Cat to try to overthrow and take over Mega Cat City in that alternate dimension. And even then, there's still plenty more good characters. But another thing about Callie is that she actually is a descendant of royalty, namely Queen Callista of Megalith City in the Dark Ages. And of course, this is pretty much realized and found out about in the episode The Bride of the Past Master, where the SWAT cats are accidentally sent back in time to the Dark Ages. And of course, the past master is trying to marry Queen Callista, and hopefully through her, he can control Megalith City in that time period. So that pretty much kind of rounds out most of the main characters. So you already have Farrell, Steel, and of course this other character who was introduced in season 2, Lieutenant Felina Farrell, aka Commander Farrell's niece, who obviously is like the only other character who ups the female presence in terms of heroines and actually frequently helps out the SWAT cats. But compared to her uncle, who basically interfered when our two heroes were still in the Enforcers to stop Dark Cat, because it kind of seems like Farrell is a man of trying to uphold the law, but he willingly is kind of somewhat bound by red tape too much. So it really ends up with him, because I mean, if it were up to him, he would willingly just destroy the whole city if it means stopping all these bad guys. So there you go with that. And I know this tier list is still not the best thing or best way of describing it, but you still kind of get the picture a little bit with some of these characters. But overall, the show is a very good series. The action is good, especially when it comes to like the second season. We really sort of they kind of upped the production, because I think it was outsourced to a Korean animation studio. But this was back then when shows actually had more hand-drawn animation, so you kind of see it a little bit. I think this photo I'm showing here may be from season 2, but if I can look back over my scripts, you have all of this. Another villainous character is darn. I think I want to bring back up the tier list again. You have one other one-off villain known as Hard Drive, and he uses a powerful thing he calls a surge code that can basically collect computer data, and he even can turn into pure energy and move through computer systems at will, as well as move through power lines. So basically, he's kind of like the Electro of this universe in a way. So you have all this stuff. So you have that one, and you also have another one-off villain named Rex Shard, who, in the episode Crystal of Chaos, he essentially he basically is a prisoner who is basically using an experimental mining device, but a sort of explosion causes the radiation to leak out, and he's mutated and turned into some sort of crystal colossus that can touch anything that comes into contact with him automatically turns to crystal too. So that's the only thing really to say about this character. Some of these villains, the only other villain that actually like made at least multiple appearances is probably Hard Drive, and some of his plots have involved like using technology to hopefully even rob Mega Cat CD Blind of defense secrets. He even steals the Turbo Cat and takes it for a joyride under the orders of Dark Cat, and forces the city to pay up under the guise that the SWAT cats are actually destroying the city instead. Another one-off villain who appears in the season's second episode is Morbulus, a cat that a evil rogue pilot that essentially has eyes in the back of his head. And the first off, he's the one destroying oil refineries at first. But once the SWAT cats take him down, he eventually is found by Dr. Viper and mutated into an evil, monstrous bacteria, which I don't think is even on this tier list here. It's kind of crazy. So that's the way you deal with. And also, yeah, here is the other grave robber that was with this guy right next to this. You don't really know that much else about some of these characters, and I kind of forget some of these other ones' names. So that primarily sort of like rounds out most of the main villains, at least some of the villains that are of note and actually kind of made a bit of an impact. But also two other characters that pretty much are just like the bulk and skull of this universe in a way are Burke and Murray here. And of course, they're the two guys who formerly worked at the scrapyard, and now they just dump junk for Chance and Jake to just basically scrap everything. But of course, all that military salvage they dumped off was probably used in building the Turbo Cat. So there you go. Even then, if they even knew about that, he quote unquote said they would quote unquote cough up a hairball if they knew that they built the Turbo Cat out of a bunch of junk, which is a crazy way that you can actually build a lot of like military grade equipment and whatnot. So there you go, though. But I will always still say, sorry, trying to find something else here. Maybe I should have stuck to the script here. No, I'm trying to find the share screen here. Sorry, I'm just like I'm not good. I don't know. I'm trying to I gotta figure out how to just do stuff pre-recorded though. And if I can just do it all like my own way. That's primarily the reason why the show is just instantly good, because you got multiple, like at least like four main villains, and you have like maybe 3 or 4 one-off villains. And in fact, let me show you. Hang on, let me rewind it back. I actually have the. All right, sorry. My DVD player is kind of screwed up. So what you're gonna see right here, that there, if you can see it well enough, that is Turmoil. And she actually was supposed to have 2 appearances, and because again, this series actually was meant to have was actually planned to have a 3rd season where some of the plot lines with her would be wrapped up. It was known as Turmoil 2: The Revenge, and of course, she would vow revenge against T-Bone after that ploy and betrayal of almost seeming like he was going to join her and her Air Force. But also you have the same thing with like Dr. Harley Street, who was turned into a hybrid space cicada, and also was supposed to team up with Dr. Viper in another episode called Doctors of Doom. But once again, that was one of the many episodes that was probably unfinished. And there were some other ones that were planned, like an episode called Succubus, where I think Pharaoh falls in love with a beautiful she-cat, but it turns out, of course, she's a succubus and sucks the life out of him. But I think that plot line was recycled and used for Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island by the same writers, no less. And again, I think the animation you see in that movie is also evident in SWAT cats, because again, these are the same people and animators that worked on that show, and you see that in like there also was like a 90s Johnny Quest TV show, and it was used for an episode in its second season called Eclipse, where I think like Haji is basically getting controlled by an evil lady succubus and actually seeks to drain the life out of Race Bannon's daughter, Jessie Bannon. But again, I barely remember that show, but again, it's out there, and I mean, you had to find it in like a Warner Archive DVD, just like SWAT Cats. But it's barely in circulation. I mean, you can probably find it secondhand or probably on Amazon for like a very reduced price at best. But still, you still see a lot. You still see a lot of it though. And of course, I think another thing I want to give to note about like Dark Cat here is that since he is the main antagonist, there actually was some promotional material depicting him as a judge that would use his legal connections to basically absolve himself of any criminal activity he does. But that's never mentioned in the show. Heck, but that actually would have been a pretty interesting dynamic where you think Farrell or even Mayor Manx is unaware that the city's main judge is actually a criminal himself. And heck, that probably would have been the basis for a possible series finale. But like I said, the show was canceled before we could actually get a good proper ending to the show. But it really is something, a very novel show for its time. But I mean, because it used action. But I mean, you could still see it as the same sort of thing like you see with like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but it's like Top Gun meets Batman and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But it's really the sort of thing of why I love watching superheroes and vigilante stories. And heck, it may also been a bit of some inspiration for my magnum opus hero story that I'm writing currently. But like I said, though, this show was bogged down because Ted Turner and the government were scared of violence shows like warping the minds of children at the time. But again, seriously, I think Bart Simpson said it best. When are they ever going to learn? Video games don't kill people. It just kills our minds. But that's actually a good thing, because when something is violent and cool, but it's like toned down to an excess where it's a great suitable for children, because you don't see a lot of like blood or gore in this show, because if it did, this show would probably never be aired at all. Hell, or probably at best, we probably see it on like something like HBO or something like Spawn. But again, this is it's a really interesting show, and I highly recommend it. I mean, especially if you love like movies like Top Gun, you love Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, you will definitely love this show. I mean, if you can find the DVD box set out there somewhere, which again, I actually do have, and I already showed you, it's on screen here. Definitely watch the show. It's really amazing. But with that being said, guys, I really want to say thank you all for tuning in. I'm actually glad I actually was able to do this a little bit better this time. But thank you all for tuning in, guys, and may God, the Force, All Mother, and the power protect you always. See you next time.